Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Gabe Bignetti, Chris Bergen, and our special guest, Bjorn Peters, is a German physicist and energy economist, as well as the co-founder and CFO of the nuclear energy startup Dual Fluid Energy. He's here to speak with us about an article in Cicero, which is a German monthly political magazine, about the German Greens scandal on the nuclear phase-out. He's sharing his insights with us into the matter, which are also published on his own website, peterscoal.de. Welcome, Bjorn.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's and thanks for being able to rejoin you.
Yeah. Definitely appreciate everything that you're doing and all of your contributions. This is a really important topic, and I'm glad that we get to cover it in some detail here. So, I remember the German nuclear phase out. I have my own little mini protest here in Seattle. We want to save the German 6, or even save only the German 3. We need to save something. What is it about this situation that was so scandalous? So how does it shape this energy crisis that you're facing in Europe?
Well, the thing is that wherever I travel, I'm being asked, how did you switch off your power plants in the midst of an energy crisis? And there is no real rational reasoning for it. It has a very long history. It goes back to the 1970s when we were building up the nuclear power. It was a left-wing project foremost. So the Social Democrats pushed very strongly for energy independence, for energy abundance, so all the topics that the Ecomodernist society is pushing for. But it was taken over by the Green movement, and then happened Chernobyl. We got relatively early out of nuclear. So with the unification in 1990, we still had, I don't know the number exactly, but something like 25 nuclear power plants, some in the east, some in the western Germany. The official phase out was then done in the year 2000. 2002, it became the law by a socialist and green government. So the government changed it in 2005, and in 2009, the Christian Democrats and the liberals, so the right-wing parties in Germany, were campaigning for nuclear energy. But they didn't say, well, we need to get back to nuclear energy. What they said was, we need another 10 years before the phase-out. And then came Fukushima, and the same government, within days, went back to the model of 2002, so with a phase-out in 2022. And nobody was discussing nuclear energy since. It was a closed shop. Together with Michael Schellenberger, I believe he was one of the founders of the Ecomodernist. He brought together people from Europe in Amsterdam 2018. And we were in a situation where people didn't speak about nuclear energy. I think in the first half of 2018, I counted exactly one article in a journal, of a leading journal, that dealt with nuclear energy at all. It was really taboo. Nobody spoke about it, and we had to bring it back to the public space. Here came the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and along with it, you might remember that in 2021 we had an energy crisis, or it started long before the war. Gas prices went up, carbon prices went up in Europe because of green policies. And as a consequence, the power prices went up by a factor of 3 to 5 each. And suddenly, everybody was speaking about the energy crisis. They thought it is about Putin who did it. But if this is so if people believe that the war really has changed the picture, then why didn't they react accordingly? And the invasion, I believe, started on the 22nd of February in 2022. And not even a week later, our green minister for the economy, Robert Habeck, he was in a morning show of a news outlet, of the national television. And he was asked, in this crisis situation, when everything changes, shouldn't we reconsider doing a coal phase out in parallel? to the nuclear phase out and nuclear. And he said, well, coal is difficult because we get lots of coal from Russia anyhow. So, and with nuclear, he said, well, I wouldn't see this as an ideological question. We are looking into it. And so the promise he gave was that there would be more or less an independent reassessment of nuclear energy in Germany. That's exactly what we need. Switching off nuclear power plants or power plants at all, no matter which ones, when there is an energy crisis, and a crisis means there's not enough energy around. It's difficult to explain, and there's no rational reason. And the Cicero article of 2 weeks ago, he displayed for the first time how the ministry was coming to those conclusions. And in 2022, it took the ministry about another week, and on the 5th of March 2022, the 3 CEOs of the major electric power utilities were invited to Berlin, to the ministry, to a meeting, and unfortunately, they were not at all prepared, and the CEOs often are not those ones who are really expert in nuclear energy or something, and they didn't know that this was the topic. So they were ill prepared. They were thinking or believing they were discussing state aids for power utilities because there was some good reasons for it. But no, it was about the nuclear phase out, and then the CEOs signed a paper with lots of incorrect assertions. And on the 7th of March, the ministries for economy and the environment, they are the regulator for the nuclear safety, jointly published a statement, an assessment paper, let's say, where they said, okay, it doesn't make sense to have more nuclear energy over 2022. And I got this on the same day. It was a mailing list with a few thousands of energy researchers and professionals. And I looked at it and said, well, this can't be true. There were so many factual, brutal errors in that assessment report of maybe 5, 6, 7 pages, even on the legal side. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I could tell immediately that there were deep legal flaws in what they were assuming is an operating license or whatever. It was really totally ridiculous. So I wrote an assessment, 3, 4 pages. I have it on my homepage, and I translated it to English as well for our American friends now. And I sent this back to this list of energy researchers and journalists and NGO employees and politicians and so on. And I marketed it to a few journalists, and some of them picked it up. So they dig deeper into this, and in particular Daniel Graeber from Cicero. He was really stubborn. He really wanted to know. It was a marvelous story. So he really got into it, and it took him, essentially 2 years to get out the story. Why? Because a Freedom of Information Act similar to the US one. So journalists have the right to get some information. But the Ministry of the Economy said, well, this is all totally confidential information and we can't publish it. And so they went to court. And in the first court hearing in November, they admitted that the nuclear discussion was not closed. They said, well, because it's not closed, we need to keep this as a secret. But then there was another court hearing I believe it was in February. And then the judge even laughed at the lawyers from the ministry and said, well, this can't be true. So you please, you do publish it. And then they had 4 weeks. And at the end of March, only Daniel Graeber got all those files. It's about, a few hundred pages of email exchange. And then he found out that, and this is now the core of the scandal, that responsible experts, the competent experts within the ministry at a lower level, they know what they're talking of. And they said, well, there is no particular reason not to keep the nuclear power plants, in particular, not regarding nuclear safety, not regarding fuel, not regarding economics. So it was all fine. And then the green state secretaries in the two ministries, they turned around those sentences into the direct opposite and then published this as the statement of from the ministries. And this is the core of the scandal, so that they took the expert opinion, switched it into the opposite, and said, well, we can't do it. And that clearly is not an independent assessment. It's an ideology-driven assessment, essentially playing out to this founding myth of the Greens that you can't have war and you can't have nuclear energy. And that was all of them, all the reasons they were founded at the first place.
That's a wonderful summary, and that hits on a point that I want to reiterate. These CEOs invited to speak with the ministers about their energy policy and state subsidies to their generation facilities. These are the CEOs who are in charge of these nuclear facilities, but you're saying that they were not briefed on this subject on that day, that meeting.
It's, I mean, these utilities are really huge, and they do have a little bit of everything. One was from Vattenfall, and actually I don't know him very well. The guy from RWE is a chap called Markus Kreber, and I got to know him a little bit. And he's a very efficient apparatchik, and he was making his career based on renewable energy. And what you should know is that RWE is the big coal miner still until today. And so this strategy to get rid of all dispatchable power and replace it with weather-dependent power, it was never really thought through, but it was the political fad, and therefore he got into his CEO position. And of course, he doesn't know anything about nuclear energy because this is something anyone wants to get rid of. So he has his staff that handles them, and they do it very competently, but they were not invited. And a little bit similar with E.ON or E.ON. That is another former state utility with broad portfolio, but they actually have a separate subsidiary for nuclear energy. That's called Poison Electra. And their CEO has been the most courageous and outspoken about nuclear energy within the political limits. So you can't do something that is totally against the political spirit, of course. But so he was always trying, and all through this time, he was saying, well, we can do it. We can keep our nuclear power plants, but it's not a matter of legal issues, operational issues, cost issues whatsoever. It's just political issues. And in summer 2021, I interviewed some of those guys, not the CEOs, but more the people responsible. And I wrote a paper and stating that for the 6 power plants that were in operations then, we could still keep them without really big issues. So the staff was still there. Of course, you need to train new staff, but that was possible at the time. Fuel elements could be sourced within reasonable amount of time. It would be highly beneficial for them from an economic point of view. The cost for prolonging 6 reactors was about 1 billion euros, which is about the same than dollars. So it was really by far the cheapest way to secure carbon-free power. But the politicians were not really interested. It didn't play really a role in the national elections of fall 2021. And we didn't get a conservative government, unfortunately. Instead, we got more socialists, Greens and the liberals that took part there. And so this was a very, very clear from them. And Poison Electra in particular was rather outspoken and continued to tell people, in whoever wanted to hear it and wanted to listen, we can do it, but you politicians, you need to take a decision and cut off a few, this phase out laws, and then we would be able to do so.
Great. Chris has a question.
Yeah, I have got two for eventually, but it's a little bit strange when, if I understand this, and I saw this story, I think a week ago myself, but when the mid-level people in government changed the wording and changed the messaging so that the people at top who made the decisions would get the wrong impression from the report. They got wrong information. No one else apparently noticed that those words were changed, that the overall message of the report was changed, and no one spoke up about it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, these statements resonated very well with the 30 years of anti-nuclear propaganda we've had. I mean, it sounds now that Robert Habeck himself is totally innocent, but we just don't have proof that he commissioned the assessment report to sound like that, because of course he wouldn't put this in a paper. I mean, that's the trick when you work in a big organization. You think twice before you put something in paper.
Okay, then I guess my second question is that the overall anti-nuclear in Europe, my understanding is that a fair number of common people are okay with nuclear. Maybe they don't care one way or the other. A few people are in favor, but primarily it's people in government and some of the ecological groups over there.
There is a relatively dramatic change in public attitude towards nuclear. When we started in 2018, it was about 40% pro-nuclear and 40% against and 20% undecided, or maybe even closer to 50% against. But we realized, against the intuition of all acting politicians, that the more we spoke about nuclear energy, the more popular it got. The people were believing it was a bad thing. When you spoke with them, we really were able to turn around public opinion. And since 2021, we are measuring in regular polls the attitude of the German population towards nuclear energy. And when we started, we were quite surprised because it is already then, I mean, that was 4 years after we started our work, we realized that already then 49% were pro and 42% were against, and 7% undecided. And nowadays, it's something like 69% pro and 25% against, and some undecided. So public opinion is not an issue at all. In Scandinavia, I mean, even the Greens there are pro-science and pro-nuclear. In Germany, they are very much anti-science.
We've seen talking points on Twitter that this is all fake news, or they absolutely couldn't get fuel in time. The second one I understand pretty well, that if we leave fuel in the reactors, it's not immediately bad, but it's not an emergency if you go past that refueling deadline, is it?
And that's exactly the way we went. So there was an energy scarcity in the winter 2022-23, and the Greens didn't want to do anything. The Liberals wanted a prolongation for at least a few years with new fuel elements. And the compromise they made was that they keep the fuel elements and run the power plants for another 3.5 months until April 15 of last year. In all those statements in March, April, May, they were saying, no, this is not possible. You don't get extra energy. But this, of course, everybody who's a little bit close to the nuclear industry knows that this is just rubbish. It's really stand up facts. And at the end, they did it exactly this way. Actually, it was Chancellor Scholz who dictated to do so, apparently, because his coalition couldn't agree on anything. And so he had to take a word of power in this case.
The other talking point I've seen is that, of course, there was new information that wasn't considered. Who is this new information coming from? What was the mysterious testimony, and where would that be documented? What supports these CEOs signing the document when there was no additional technical review? I'm waiting for folks on Twitter to show us this technical documentation. the CEOs weren't nuclear experts. They weren't briefed on the topic. They were essentially bamboozled into signing this document. They were said, "Oh, yeah, we want to talk to you. Please come here, and we'll talk policy." And oh yeah, sign this before you go. So.
It was not that easy because the rubbish level in the first minutes were apparently so high that even they refused to sign it. A week of negotiation or so until they did so. So this was, they were fabricated minutes. So apparently everybody in the room understood that. That's what I've heard from the one board member that was close to the CEO. So where's the smoking gun? That's probably your question.
The first part, yeah.
Yeah. And obviously, one of the reasons Robert Habeck said, even in his first interview, February 22, that they would look into it. They said, well, but the operators say, well, it's not a good idea. And this was totally false. This week, Preußen Electra board published a letter to their employees and said they consistently, at every single occasion, said, we can do it, but you guys in the political space, you need to move. So this was lie number one. Lie number two was, he said in his first statement, well, this comes at a huge risk for technical failure. But the law stipulates that as long as you operate a power plant, it has to be in the best possible state. So those were essentially new. They were operating perfectly until the very last day. And we know now from this Cicero article and the files they got that the competent people in the ministry, they asked the institution that is responsible for nuclear safety, GRS, Gesellschaft für Reaktorsicherheit, so Society for Nuclear Safety. And I mean, they are trained engineers. Nothing is too difficult for a good engineer. They're trained for handling complex issues, but maybe it costs a little bit of time and money and effort, but it can be done. And this was the second lie the minister was caught with. And the third one is probably, we're currently digging to find an exact trail. He was saying, well, we don't anyhow get fuel so easily because usually when you order fuel, it takes 18 to 24 months to get it shipped. But this is the usual production cycle. And in April 2022, somebody from Westinghouse told an online journal here in Germany, they called the Pioneer, I think you have it in the US as well, told them we were asked and we told the government that we could ship it within the year 2022. And we understood a little later that the production of fuel elements costs exactly 114 days or something like this. So it's not even 4 months. And it's just, why does it usually take 18 to 24 months? Because you have plenty of time, you order it well in advance, and then you organize the production slots in a way that everything runs smoothly. But there was an underutilization of the fuel element capacities, production capacities. So it could have been done easily as before the year end of 2022 to provide new fuel elements to the reactors, 3 or 6 reactors. And then at the end of 2021, they had switched off 3 nuclear power plants. And of course, the dismantling hadn't started yet in February, because it takes a couple of months, sometimes a couple of years before you prepared everything in a way that you can start. And of course, the fuel elements are still very hot initially, so you need a cool down phase and everything. So everything was in perfect order in February. So we could have easily saved 6 power plants until the end of 2022. So fuel elements were certainly not a limiting factor, but this was quoted by the minister and by his state secretaries in this assessment report. So that's a third lie. Then there were legal issues. In the first version of this assessment report, they said, well, now at the end of last year, the operation license has expired and you need a new environmental impact assessment to restart it. So this is utterly bollock. I mean, really, it's so strange to say something like this, because these operations of a power plant includes the dismantling phase. That this operating license ends when it's green meadows after the complete dismantling. Then the operating license has to start. So the only thing that ended was the right to produce power and to market it. And this is in a law that you can change easily, but just need to organize a majority in the Bundestag, in our national parliament. So there's a fourth lie. Topic after topic, they twisted reality in a way to fit into their anti-nuclear narrative. And this is extremely, disgustingly destructive for the German economy, because power prices went up afterwards. They've come down now, but because the energy crisis now not longer an energy crisis, but an economic crisis. So we have lost 10% of the industrial capacity. We consume much less electricity than 3 years ago, of, let's say, compared to 2019, before Corona hit. Everything is going down the drain, and these people still stick to their ideology, and we certainly will try to understand every single move and not keep quiet.
It's amazing. In the chat, and now I'm wondering, what is the political consequence?
The thing is, ideally, the coalition wouldn't survive until 2025. We would get national elections a little earlier, because the trend is much more conservative, pro-nuclear right now in the population. And every day the dismantling goes on, the getting back the nuclear power plants gets more expensive and more tedious.
Mm-hmm. Is it too late to reverse this decision? Can Germany restore its nuclear reactors?
Well, obviously. I mean, their nuclear power plants are essentially defined by the pressure vessel. And that is a large piece of iron and steel that if this is touched, then it's over. But everything else can be reversed in a dismantling. It's just getting more expensive from day to day. And that's why the Greens try to hasten people, that they destroy as much as possible. So it's really burning bridges, like people do it in war. Some generals order it to burn the bridges behind them when they have to retreat. And that's what the Greens are currently doing with nuclear energy. It's really amazing. As long as this streetlight coalition, red, green, and red, yellow, green, is in office, this vandalism will go on.
What is any kind of a guarantee that a nuclear developer would have that this couldn't happen again, even if Germany's policies reversed completely? What would protect those investments from being destroyed by politicians?
I have said so a couple of years. When there is a movement back, nobody will invest on it unless it comes with a guarantee for at least 15 or 20 years. So this is the trust from the energy sector in German politics, and maybe in Europe as similar. I don't know this well enough, but in Germany, the trust has been lost more than 10 years ago. In particular, with the phase-out decision, nobody in the energy sector actually understood it, because everybody who knows about nuclear energy knows that it's highly unlikely that we get a tsunami in Bavaria.
Is there anything to look forward to? Someone told me once that every hotel you go to, if you turn a plate over, it will say "Made in Germany." Is that your future still, or is this at risk?
I think it's we're losing this ability right now, because all energy in this intense production is leaving Germany. What politicians don't understand is that the energy intense processes at the beginning are high tech nowadays. It's highly specialized, and they are at the beginning of long value chains that go through sometimes several industries. This holds true for the chemical industry and the metallurgic industry. So they're extremely important to produce stuff. the more you know about the specifics of production process, the better the product is. And that was large parts of this value proposition of made in Germany. And we are losing this ability now. And then we're deliberately destroying the car industry, the car making industry. This has been really, really devastating for the German industry. And the interesting thing is that they don't care. They never speak up. Very strange. Nobody understands it. I don't get into politics. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. I don't see much of a hope, but yeah, and so we're all living in this delusion that economy is something that operates in cycles. So sometimes going up, sometimes going down, then it's going up again. But there's no bloody rule out there that it's always going in cycles. Sometimes it just goes down and stays there. I look at Detroit.
Thank you so much for the information behind the German nuclear scandal from someone who is very deeply involved in this problem. This has been the Ecomodernist Channel Live. You can find us here every Sunday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on YouTube at Ecomodernist 1 or the Ecomodernist Channel Live. You can find us on my personal Twitch, that's Soyaddle, soyaddle.tv, twitch.tv/Soyaddle, and of course you can find us on our website, esna.earth, that's esna.earth. Find us on Facebook at the Ecomodernist Society of North America, and please continue to support us on Patreon at the Ecomodernist channel there on Patreon. And remember, emissions first, peace and justice will follow.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, Ecomodernist Channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, Ecomodernist Society of North America.
And online at https://esna.earth.